Chief Justice John Roberts swearing in senators as jurors yesterday for only the third time in our nation's history. This is the one-time Giuliani associate, Lev Parnas, claiming a former Trump attorney made a visit to him in jail and asked him to fall on his sword.
I didn't feel that they were trying to get me out, and at that point, I had a meeting with John Dowd and Downing inside the jail, and John Dowd just, instead of comforting me and, try and calm me down, telling me like it's going to be okay, like don't worry, basically start talking to me like a drill sergeant. If you don't get out of here right now, something bad's going to happen because I don't want to see the two of you. And at that point, Downing hit the emergency button.
Were they telling you to sacrifice yourself in order to protect the president?
That's what I felt.
Let's get right to it with our headliner this morning, Trey Gowdy, former House Oversight Committee chairman and a Fox News contributor. Good morning to you, and thanks for being here, Trey. So what is your response when you hear that?
That I would encourage your viewers to listen to the entire interview, not just the snippets. Remember, Parnas was upset because he expected Giuliani and Trump to come to his defense. This is a guy charged with falsifying records, making a false statement, conspiracy to defraud the FEC. He's upset. By the way, John Dowd is not Trump's former lawyer. That's not how I would characterize him. He is Parnas's hand-picked lawyer. That's who hired John Dowd and Kevin Downing. It was Lev Parnas. So if he's upset that he hired these two, he's got nobody to blame but himself. He wanted Giuliani and Trump to come to his defense. In these three charges that he's facing, that's why he's upset. But you only get that from watching the entire interview, not from reading the stories and not from listening to that snippet.
Was he asked precisely, if he said the president knew exactly what he was doing, has he described what those meetings were about or conversations were about? Have you heard that yet?
Bill, what I didn't hear was the follow-up. Okay, with total certitude, you say President Trump knew what you were doing. Convince us of that. Give us the evidence. Remember, he also said that Bill Barr was in the loop, and then when cited for evidence, he said, well, he's friends with DeGeneva and Tunzing, and his name was mentioned in a transcript. If that's the only evidence you have that Bill Barr is part of a conspiracy to defraud the United States and get a foreign government to investigate a political opponent, if the only evidence you have is who he's friends with and his name was mentioned in the transcript, that ain't much evidence, Bill. So I need to hear the follow-up questions. And I'm not knocking people in your line of work. I mean, that's a different interview style. But the way lawyers interview people, when you cross-examine them, Parnas gave three different answers to the same question about Mike Pence. His first answer is, I'm absolutely certain Pence knew about it. And then about 3 seconds later, he said, well, he had to have, right? And then the last answer was, well, it was possible. Those three answers don't do you well in a courtroom. They do great if you're writing headlines. They do not do well in a courtroom.
Well, Nancy Pelosi didn't rule out the possibility of talking to him in this impeachment process. I mean, what are we supposed to think the impact of those interviews are going to have as this impeachment trial is officially underway now?
I was stunned at how little it takes in Speaker Pelosi's eyes to call for special counsel. You have someone who's under indictment, a Ukrainian under indictment that no one would have believed 6 months ago, who says that it's possible that Bill Barr may have been in on it based on the fact that his name was in a transcript, and she's willing to call for special counsel. I think the threshold for besmirching someone's reputation, particularly somebody like Bill Barr, ought to be a little higher than relying on one of 6 or 7 different answers that Lev Parnas gave to the same question in an MSNBC interview. If you're going to make Lev Parnas the center of your impeachment prosecution, then you're also opening yourself to having to call the hundreds of witnesses who have an opinion on his veracity and credibility. So it's not just Lev Parnas who's a witness, it's anyone who has an opinion on his credibility. So now we're up to what? 20-something witnesses? I mean, how many people can we find to say, you know what, we don't believe Lev Parnas. We would not believe him under oath. So now this 6-week trial is a 6-month trial.
So generally speaking, then, based on that answer, do you think they use witnesses in this trial or not? What is the agreed upon decision, do you think?
I think they don't, because you can't just say we want John Bolton, but we don't want this witness, and we want Mick Mulvaney, but we don't want this witness. I mean, either call them all or make the House do what they should have done, which is talk to all of these witnesses themselves. They're the ones with the charging power. They're the ones who made the decision not to call Mike Pompeo or Mick Mulvaney or John Bolton or Rudy Giuliani. So either call all the witnesses or don't call any of the witnesses and make the House prove its case based on what it has.
All right, let's move to Chuck Schumer. He said this yesterday after we watched Chief Justice John Roberts and others. Hear from the Hill now.
President Donald Trump is accused of coercing a foreign leader into interfering in our elections and then doing everything in his power to cover it up. These are exactly the kind of offenses the founders most feared. This is what the nation has feared for centuries. And we fear it today more than ever with this president.
We are going to hear on Tuesday the case begin at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. In all likelihood, the meat of the case is not presented until maybe even Thursday of next week. Democrats will go first. The president's defense team will follow that. If you're on the White House defense team, Trey, how do you frame his defense before those 100 senators?
The transcript. The transcript is the single best piece of evidence that the president has. Who brought up Rudy Giuliani's name? It wasn't Donald Trump. It was Zelensky. This was the second call, not the first call. If President Trump were really hell-bent on ensuring that Ukraine investigate the Bidens, would he not, Bill, have brought that up in the first telephone call he had with Zelensky? I mean, why wait till the second? Who brought up Bill Barr, and under what circumstances was Bill Barr's name brought up? I think the transcript is the single best piece of evidence that the president has. I mean, laying aside the reality that there was no announcement of an investigation, there was no investigation, and the aid was ultimately released. So I don't think the Democrats have a great case for conviction, but I also would be hard-pressed to find 5 members of this jury that have not already made up their minds.
Just some breaking news here. We're starting to get a look at what the president's legal team looks like. This from our own John Roberts reporting just a few moments ago. Pat Cipollone, of course, the White House counsel, Jay Sekulow, Ken Starr, a former Fox News contributor, will be parting ways with the network. Alan Dershowitz, Robert Ray, Pam Bondi, and Jane Raskin. Want to get your immediate thoughts and reaction to that, Trey?
All good lawyers. What's more important than having good lawyers is having good facts. But those are all really good lawyers. Yeah, John Ratcliffe, I think, would have been a great addition if you're going to have a member of the House because of his background as a U.S. attorney. But you know, they're good trial lawyers. They're folks that are good in front of a jury, and then they're folks. You know, Ken Starr was one of the premier appellate advocates in the country. I'm not sure that he would tell you he was a great trial lawyer. But I think Pat Cipollone and Jay Sekulow would be really good trial lawyers. So it sounds like he's got a really good mix.
What's interesting,
but what's more
Trey,
important than having good lawyers is good facts.
Cipollone, we heard the name before. Jay Sekulow, we expected that. But the addition of Ken Starr and his experience 21, 25 years ago is interesting. Robert Ray, I believe, worked with Ken Starr during the 1990s during that case. Dershowitz is a name that had been floated out there, but really was not confirmed until today. What you're saying is that they make good lawyers in a public venue. Did I hear you correctly on that?
You know, only one lawyer can talk at a time. So ideally, the others are thinking while one's talking. So what you don't want is 7 different lawyers trying to make a connection with the jury or the public, in this case, if you think the public is the jury. I expect Jay and Pat to take the lead in terms of communicating, and I expect the others to be thinking while they're talking. Dershowitz, I'm sure, is a great con law professor. There are other good con law professors. They're going to have to, I'm sure they weighed and balances the pluses and minuses of adding him to the team. But you can only talk one at a time, and I would be shocked if Pat and Jay did not do most of the talking in this trial.
As far as the timing of this trial is concerned, Trey, there were estimates that it could be quick. It could last as long as 6 weeks. Where do you fall on that, and what does the length of time mean?
I mean, God help us if it lasts 6 weeks. I mean, the investigation's over, so it's Schiff's job to present the case. If he's going to present the case on the paper with the depositions, it shouldn't take that long. You know, I don't need Adam to read the depositions to me. The jury can go read it themselves if they open it up to witnesses, and they want Bolton, and then there's some Republicans that want 4 or 5 other witnesses. It could last 6 weeks. Sandra, I just have not met anyone whose opinion has changed during the pendency of this investigation. And I can't identify maybe 3 open-minded jurors in the U.S. Senate. I just don't, no matter how long it lasts, I don't think it's going to change anyone's mind in the Senate or among my fellow citizens. So the shorter, the better.
Yep. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you want to give us a time frame
No,
for
sir.
that?
Shorter the better, but you're predicting what?
I'm saying 2 weeks. If it goes 6 weeks, then they're going to have to make some hard decisions on which witnesses are important enough to hear from and which ones, while they may have relevant evidence, we just don't. I think in terms of a real trial, why would you ever not call a witness if that witness has relevant information? How do you pick which ones to call and which ones not to? I mean, you can never do that in a real trial. So if we're going to open this thing up anew to a brand new investigation, then call everybody, and God knows how long that'll take.
All right, last topic here. James Comey apparently is under investigation for leaking this Russian document. The New York Times broke the story last night. You read it. What do you make of it, sir?
You know, Bill, I am not a fan of Jim Comey's, but I am a fan of being fair, even to people that I don't personally like. I'm familiar with this fact pattern. I am almost certain it came up in a House Intel classified briefing, and Comey would not discuss it. He wouldn't discuss it even though it benefited him to discuss it. So let me be really, really clear to all my Republican friends. I'm not a Comey fan. But I'm also not a fan of indicting and convicting people based on New York Times reporting. He had an opportunity to tell us about this fact pattern, and he didn't do it, even though it would have benefited him. So I'll be really surprised if Jim Comey committed a felony in leaking this information when he didn't even share it with people he could have shared it with when it would have helped him to do so.
Trey Gowdy, thank you for your time today, sir.
All right,
Yes,
Trey,
sir.
thank you.
Thank you.
Carolina, thanks.